What if everything you've been told about the 2008 financial crisis is a lie? What if it wasn't an accident? Not a perfect storm? Not a few bad apples? What if the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the bailouts, the panic, was all part of a plan, a meticulously engineered wealth transfer, the largest in human history? You feel the consequences every single day. The crushing student debt they won't forgive, the medical bill that could bankrupt you, the 2 jobs you work just to keep up with an inflation rate that feels manufactured, the dream of home ownership, slipping further and further away. This isn't the fallout of a random economic disaster. This is the permanent scar tissue from a financial wound that was deliberately inflicted. For the last 15 years, you've been told a story of mistakes and miscalculations, a story designed to make you blame your neighbor, blame the immigrant, blame the poor. It's time to tear that story to shreds. Today, we expose the real story, the story of a weapon, built in the shadows, a weapon not of steel, but of paper and promises, a weapon designed to vaporize $10 trillion of your wealth and transfer it directly into the pockets of the ultra-elite. To understand the heist of 2008, we have to go back, not to 2007 or 2006. We have to go back to the 1630s, to a flower, the tulip mania. The history books tell you it was a silly frenzy, where Dutch merchants paid fortunes for a single tulip bulb. They paint it as a lesson in human greed and stupidity. But that's a simplification, a distraction. The real story of tulip mania wasn't about the flowers. It was about the contracts. People weren't just buying bulbs. They were buying and selling promises to buy bulbs in the future. They were trading pieces of paper, derivatives, on a scale that dwarfed the actual physical tulip market. The entire economy got hooked on this speculative drug. The value was an illusion, propped up by belief, and when belief cracked, the entire system imploded overnight. Sound familiar? Let's jump forward. 1929. The Roaring Twenties. Again, the history books give you a simple tale, the stock market crash. But the real engine of the collapse was something called buying on margin. Ordinary people and massive funds were borrowing up to 90% of the money they used to buy stocks. They were leveraging themselves to the gills, betting on a perpetual bull market. The brokers and the banks encouraged it, collecting their fees, turning a blind eye to the risk. The entire economy was built on a mountain of debt that could never be repaid. When the music stopped, the brokers called in their loans, and the house of cards collapsed. Sound familiar? Now, let's land in the early 2000s. The dot-com bubble had just burst. The Federal Reserve, trying to stimulate the economy, slashed interest rates to historic lows, to just 1%. This created an ocean of cheap money. Where was it all supposed to go? The answer was real estate. The government championed an ownership society. Lenders were pushed, even incentivized, to give mortgages to people who could not, under any traditional metric, afford them. These were the infamous ninja loans. No income, no job, no assets. But this is where the official story starts to lie to you. They tell you the problem was these subprime borrowers, these poor people who bit off more than they could chew. That's a scapegoat, a convenient smokescreen. The real problem wasn't the borrower, it was the loan. Or more precisely, what the financial wizards on Wall Street decided to do with it. They created a machine that would take these risky, ticking time bombs of debt and magically transform them into a AA-rated risk-free investment gold. They called this process securitization. Here's how it worked. They would bundle thousands of these individual mortgages together into a new financial product, a mortgage-backed security, or MBS. They then sliced this MBS into different pieces, called tranches, based on risk. The idea was, even if some mortgages defaulted, the majority wouldn't. So the investment as a whole was safe. They sold these MBS packages to pension funds, foreign governments, and other banks all over the world. The risk was supposedly diversified. It was financial alchemy, turning lead into gold. And the credit rating agencies Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, they were the high priests of this new religion, stamping their holy AA approval on these toxic bundles for a fat fee. They had a huge conflict of interest, getting paid by the very banks whose products they were supposed to be rating. The entire global financial system became interconnected through these securities. A default on a mortgage in Cleveland could now theoretically impact a pension fund in Norway. The system was wired together with a hidden, volatile explosive. Sound familiar? But this was just a fuse. The bomb itself was something else. Something darker, more complex, and deliberately designed to be opaque. It was a financial instrument so powerful, so dangerous, that it could not only bet on the collapse, it could actively cause it. And the most shocking part, it was completely unregulated. It existed in the shadows, outside of any public exchange or oversight. They found their answer in a concept invented decades earlier. A concept so simple in its design, and so cataclysmic in its application, that it would become the central weapon of the heist. The credit default swap. At its heart, a CDS is just an insurance contract. Let's say you own a bond, like a mortgage-backed security. You're worried it might fail. So, you go to an insurance company like AIG and buy a credit default swap. You pay them a regular premium. In return, they promise to cover your losses if that bond goes into default. Simple enough, right? It sounds like a prudent way to manage risk. But here's the first critical twist, the loophole that turned insurance into a casino. You didn't have to own the asset to buy insurance on it. Think about that. It's like being able to buy fire insurance on your neighbor's house. You don't own the house. You have no interest in its safety. In fact, if the house burns down, you get a massive payout. Suddenly, you're not just hoping the house doesn't burn down. You're actively betting that it will. This is what Wall Street did. Hedge funds and investment banks started buying CDSs on those toxic mortgage-backed securities that they themselves had helped create and sell. They knew the underlying loans were junk. They knew the AAA ratings were a sham. So they started placing billions and billions of dollars in bets that these securities would fail. This created a synthetic shadow market that was many times larger than the actual mortgage market itself. For every $1 of a risky mortgage security out there were maybe $20, $30, even $40 of bets credit default swaps wagered on its fate. This wasn't just betting on a collapse. This created a massive system-wide incentive for the collapse to happen. The more insurance you sell on a car, the more people are betting on it to crash. The people who stood to make billions from the failure of the system were the very same people who understood its inner workings. They weren't just predicting the fire, they were holding the matches. The stage was set. You had a housing market built on a foundation of lies. You had these loans bundled into securities that were sold around the world as safe. And then, you had a secret, unregulated insurance market, betting trillions of dollars on the whole thing to burn. All it needed was a spark. And when that spark came, the resulting explosion wasn't an accident, it was a detonation, a controlled demolition of the global economy, designed by the few, for the few, at the expense of everyone else. This story is far from over. Have you ever heard of moral hazard? It sounds complicated, but it's simple. Imagine you could take out a life insurance policy on your neighbor. You have no insurable interest. You don't lose anything financially if they live a long, happy life. But if they die, you get a massive payout. Suddenly, you're incentivized for their death. This is moral hazard. And for this exact reason, it was illegal in almost every form of insurance, except for one, the credit default swap, or CD. In the lead up to 2008, the CDS market was the Wild West. No rules, no oversight, and Wall Street took full advantage. What happened next was not just a mistake. It was a calculated act of financial sabotage. Hedge funds and investment banks started buying billions of dollars worth of these credit default swaps against the very mortgage-backed securities they themselves had created and sold to their clients. Think about that. They were selling a car they knew had faulty brakes, and then secretly taking out a massive insurance policy on the buyer, betting on the crash. They were actively betting against their own customers. But the contagion didn't stop there, because these CDS contracts weren't just simple insurance policies. They became a new kind of currency, a new form of pure speculation. Banks would sell CDS contracts to other banks. Then, those banks would turn around and sell CDS contracts on those CDS contracts. It created a $60 trillion shadow market, a massive, invisible daisy chain of interconnected promises, all resting on the fragile foundation of those shaky subprime mortgages. It was a house of mirrors where every reflection was just a bet on the failure of the reflection next to it. The entire global financial system was now a network of tripwires, all connected to a single, gigantic bomb. Let's break this down with a clear analogy. Imagine a neighborhood with 100 houses. You get a mortgage from a local bank, but they don't hold on to it. They sell it to a giant investment bank like Goldman Sachs. Goldman then bundles your mortgage with 999 others, creating something called a collateralized debt obligation, or CDO. It's just a fancier, more complex version of a mortgage-backed security. Now, they slice this CDO into tiers, like layers of a cake. The top layer is the senior tranche. It's labeled AAA rated, the safest of the safe. This is the slice they sell to your pension fund or your city's retirement plan. Below that is the mezzanine tranche, a bit riskier, sold to speculators looking for a higher return. And at the very bottom is the equity tranche. This is the toxic junk, the first part to take a loss if homeowners start to default. This slicing and dicing was the first layer of the illusion. By bundling and repackaging risky mortgages, they convinced the world they had magically created safe assets out of toxic waste. Now, enter the weapon. A hedge fund, let's call it Magnetar, looks at this neighborhood full of questionable mortgages and thinks, this whole thing is going to burn down. They go to a massive insurance company, like AIG, and say, we want to buy a credit default swap on $1 billion worth of those AAA-rated CDO tranches. You reinsuring AIG, seeing only free money, says sure, you pay us a $20 million premium every year. If those CDOs go bust, we AIG will pay you the full $1 billion. And here is the most critical point of all. The hedge fund, Magnetar, doesn't actually own any of the CDOs they're betting against. They are placing a pure, naked bet on disaster. They are buying fire insurance on their neighbor's house, hoping it burns to the ground so they can collect. But what if it gets even more sinister? What if the person betting on the fire could also help start it? What if Magnetar wasn't just a passive bettor? What if they could actively ensure that the neighborhood burns down? Here's exactly how they did it. Evidence shows that certain hedge funds engaged in a strategy called CDO arbitrage. It's a chillingly simple concept. They would go to an investment bank like Merrill Lynch and say, "We provide the initial capital for the riskiest equity tranche of a new CDO you rebuilding. Remember that toxic bottom layer?" By funding it, the hedge fund provided the seed money that made the creation of the entire toxic CDO possible. But more importantly, it gave them a seat at the table. They got to influence what went inside the CDO. And what did they insist on? They insisted that the CDO be stuffed with the absolute riskiest, most volatile, and most likely to fail mortgages they could find. They were actively helping to build the very bomb they had already placed a massive bet against. They were the arsonists posing as firefighters while simultaneously selling insurance policies on the inferno they were about to light. This wasn't just speculation anymore. This was financial engineering with malicious intent. This was the dark, beating heart of the 2008 collapse. Welcome to the final act. This is where we see the bomb detonate and the master plan unfold. We left off with the financial arsonists actively building toxic CDOs that they were simultaneously betting against using credit default swaps. The entire system was a $60 trillion house of cards, just waiting for a slight gust of wind. That gust came in 2007, as homeowners, one by one, began defaulting on those subprime mortgages they never should have been given. The foundation began to crack. But the elites, the ones who built the bomb, were ready. They had their bets in place. They were shorting the market, waiting for the collapse they engineered. The fall of Lehman Brothers on September 15, 2008 wasn't the cause of the crisis. It was the trigger. It was the gunshot that started the panic. That was the moment the rest of the world finally realized the scale of the problem. If Lehman's $600 billion in CDS contracts couldn't be honored, then the entire daisy chain would unravel. Every bank that had sold protection to Lehman and every bank that had sold protection to those asterisk banks, was now on the hook for billions. It was financial domino theory and terrifying real-time action. But here is the final, most damning piece of the puzzle. The weekend right before Lehman Brothers fell, there was a secret meeting at the New York Federal Reserve. The heads of all the major banks were there. The government, represented by Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, who just happened to be the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, and Tim Geithner of the New York Fed, made a choice. They chose to let Lehman fail. They claimed they had no legal authority to save it. But just a few days later, they orchestrated a massive $85 billion bailout for the insurance giant AIG. Why? Why save AIG but not Lehman? The answer is simple. Follow the money. AIG was the counterparty on an estimated $440 billion in credit default swaps. If AIG went down, it would have taken Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Deutsche Bank, and the entire core of the global financial system with it. Lehman was a strategic sacrifice. Its collapse was used to create the panic needed to justify the unprecedented bailouts that were to come. The contagion was allowed to spread just enough to terrify the public and force Congress into handing over trillions of dollars. But it was contained right before it could destroy the most powerful institutions at the very top, the same institutions that had created the crisis in the first place. The arsonists not only got away with it, they got paid for it, first by their bets, and then by the taxpayer. Have you ever wondered where all the money went in 2008? It wasn't just lost, it was moved. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the shocking numbers that reveal the true scale of the greatest heist in modern history. Forget what you think you know. The real story is in the data, and it's far more staggering than you can imagine. Let's start with a number that's almost impossible to comprehend. $60 trillion. That's a 6 with 13 zeros. This was the notional value of the credit default swap, or CDS market at its peak. To put that into perspective, $60 trillion was larger than the entire world's gross domestic product at the time. It was an Everest of imaginary money, a mountain of financial bets built on top of the global economy. Now, you might think these credit default swaps were a form of insurance, a way for lenders to protect themselves if a borrower couldn't pay back a loan, and some of them were. But here's the really insane part. A staggering 90% of that $60 trillion market was purely speculative. It was a casino. People were buying insurance on assets they didn't even own. Imagine your neighbor buying a fire insurance policy on your house. What incentive would they have to help you put out a fire? None. In fact, they'd have a massive incentive to see it burn to the ground. That's exactly what was happening in the financial system. 90% of this market was just people betting on financial collapse. This massive, unregulated casino was operating in the shadows, outside the view of traditional banking. This was the shadow banking system, and when the house of cards finally started to teeter, when Lehman Brothers collapsed in September 2008, the panic was immediate and catastrophic. In a single week following Lehman's failure, $447 billion of capital fled the shadow banking system. This wasn't like the old black and white photos of people lining up outside banks. This was an invisible bank run, happening silently, electronically, in the blink of an eye. It was a digital stampede that threatened to freeze the entire circulatory system of global finance. So, the system imploded. The government had to step in, right? They had to fix what was broken. They passed a massive piece of legislation called the Dodd-Frank Act, meant to reform Wall Street and prevent this from ever happening again. The initial draft was 837 pages long. It was supposed to be the definitive answer, the rulebook for a new, safer financial world. Now, get this, in that entire 837-page document, how many times do you think the word derivatives appeared? Remember, derivatives like credit default swaps were the very instruments, the financial weapons of mass destruction that caused the meltdown. The answer, 0. Not once. It's like writing a report on a plane crash and deliberately leaving out any mention of the engines failing. The root cause of the entire global collapse was intentionally ignored in the very legislation designed to prevent it. Instead of fixing the problem, what did they do? They bailed out the culprits. You've probably heard about the TARP bailout, the $700 billion program that was so controversial, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the part they wanted you to see. Behind the scenes, the Federal Reserve was conducting a secret rescue operation on a scale that dwarfs the public bailout. They secretly doled out $16 trillion in zero-interest loans to the very same banks that had set the world on fire. 16 trillion. This wasn't a bailout. It was a secret life support system for the arsonists. While Main Street was losing homes and jobs, Wall Street was getting unlimited interest-free cash delivered in secret. So, let's be crystal clear about what happened. The wealth, the 10 trillion or so that vanished from the economy, wasn't destroyed. It didn't just evaporate. It was transferred. It was a methodical, systematic siphoning of wealth from your pension funds, from the equity in your home, from your future wages, and from your national treasury. And where did it go? It was moved directly onto the balance sheets of the financial elite. They gambled, they lost, and then they sent you the bill. They socialized the losses and privatized the gains, and they did it permanently. This wasn't an accident, it was a transaction. So, that was then. Where does that leave us today? Surely, they learned their lesson. Right, wrong. The system wasn't fixed, it was reloaded. The credit default swap market, the casino that blew up the world. It still exists, and by some measures, it's even larger. The too big to fail banks, the ones that were deemed so systemically important that they had to be bailed out. They are now 40% larger than they were in 2008. Their power and influence have only grown. And the overall derivatives market, that universe of complex financial bets, it's no longer measured in trillions. It's measured in quadrillions. A quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. The numbers have become so astronomical they've lost all meaning. The fundamental architecture of risk remains the same. The same incentives, the same instruments, the same players. The only thing that's changed is the name on the package. The next collapse won't be a carbon copy of the last one. It won't be in subprime mortgages. The next crisis is already brewing, quietly, in other sectors. It's in commercial real estate, with office buildings sitting empty. It's in auto loans, bundled up and sold off. It's in the mountain of student debt that is crippling a generation. All of these debts have been bundled, sliced, diced, and insured using the exact same playbook. Have you ever felt like you're playing a game where the rules are constantly changing, and you're always one step behind? Let's talk about 2008. The financial crisis wasn't just a market correction, it was a classroom, and for the financial elite, it taught one brutal, unforgettable lesson. There is no limit to what the public will sacrifice to save a system they are told is essential. Think about it. Trillions of dollars in bailouts, homes lost, lives upended. And what were the consequences for those at the top? It was a heist with no getaway car, because they never had to leave the scene of the crime. They already owned the bank, the police, and the government. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's the world they built. A world running on borrowed time, built on the foundation of our collective denial. We're constantly told to be afraid. Fear inflation, fear recession, fear the next crash. It's a constant barrage of economic boogeymen designed to keep us anxious and compliant. But what if our real fear shouldn't be the market fluctuations, but the architects themselves? The engineers of this system, the people who look at a beautiful, complex system of human cooperation and see only a machine to be gamed for personal profit. They understand the mechanics of fear better than anyone. They know that if they can keep you worried about losing your job or your savings, you won't have the energy to look up and question who's actually pulling the levers. The media amplifies this, turning economic jargon into headline-grabbing horror stories. We're taught to see the economy as this uncontrollable force of nature, like a hurricane or an earthquake. But it's not. It's a construct. It was designed, and it can be redesigned. The problem is, the people who designed it are the only ones with the user manual. So, the question isn't asterisk if asterisk the next engineered collapse is coming. The question is, will we see it for what it is this time? Are we any wiser now? Or are we just walking the same well-trodden path in slightly better suits, glued to our smartphones? They're counting on us to react the same way, to panic, to demand that the system be saved at any cost, and to foot the bill once again. They're counting on our short memory and our willingness to believe that this time, it's different. But look around, the signs are there. Wealth inequality is soaring. The same financial instruments that caused the last crisis are back, just with new names. The narrative is already being written. We're being prepped for the next unforeseeable event. But what if it is foreseeable? What if the patterns are clear for anyone willing to look beyond the daily noise? They want us to believe it's all too complicated for the average person to understand. That's the greatest trick they ever pulled, convincing you that the language of money is a foreign tongue you could never master. It's not. It's about incentives, power, and control. It's about who benefits when things go right and who pays the price when things go wrong. For decades, the answer has been the same. The profits are privatized, and the losses are socialized. You and I, our families, our communities, we are the insurance policy for their high-stakes gambles. It's a casino where the house never loses because it can just print more chips, devaluing the ones in your pocket. We are told to trust the experts, the central bankers, the treasury secretaries. Many of them cycle through the same revolving door between Wall Street and Washington. Are they public servants, or are they just protecting the interests of the club they belong to? When they speak of stabilizing the economy, whose economy are they really stabilizing? The one on Main Street or the one on Wall Street? The answer seems painfully obvious if you just connect the dots. This isn't about left versus right. This is about up versus down. It's about a system that has been engineered to funnel wealth upwards relentlessly, while leaving the majority to fight over the scraps. They create bubbles, they profit from the boom, they get bailed out during the bust, and then they buy up all the assets at bargain prices from the very people who were just wiped out. It's a cycle, a predictable, profitable cycle, and it will continue as long as we allow ourselves to be distracted and divided. So, what's the solution? The first step is awareness. It's about rejecting the narrative of fear and complexity. It's about asking the hard questions and demanding straight answers. It's about understanding that your personal financial struggles are not a personal failure, but a symptom of a sick system. They want you isolated, feeling like you're the only one who can't keep up, but you're not alone. Millions of people feel the same way. If this conversation made you question the very foundations of our economy, then this channel is for you. We're here to connect the dots they desperately want to keep separate. The story they're telling you about the next crisis is already a lie, and it's time you knew the truth. Share this video with one person you know who needs to see it. Let's start a real conversation. Drop your thoughts, your skepticism, your anger in the comments below. Let's debate, let's learn, let's build a community of awareness. And make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell because we're just getting started. The next video will dive even deeper. Thanks for watching.